Riley, and my first guest is our Washington columnist, Kim Strassel. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Jason.
So, Rick Santorum bowed out today, the big political news this afternoon. What's your reaction, Kim?
Well, I think that people had been expecting this. There had been a view out there among, a growing view among the Republican primary voters that Mitt Romney was looking a little inevitable. Mr. Santorum seemed to understand that. Also, we had a primary in his home state of Pennsylvania coming up. Mr. Romney was looking very strong there, throwing a lot of money into it. It would have been an embarrassing defeat to have lost in his home state, and so I think he decided to take this moment to gracefully bow out.
Okay, I think we have a clip from his speech today. I think we're going to play that now.
We made a decision to get into this race at our kitchen table and against all the odds, and we made a decision over the weekend that while this presidential race for us is over for me, and we will suspend our campaign effective today, we are not done fighting. We are going to continue to fight for those voices. We're going to continue to fight for the Americans who stood up and gave us that air under our wings that allowed us to accomplish things that no political expert would have ever expected.
Kim, did Rick Santorum wait too long to do this? It's been clear for a while that he probably couldn't win the nomination, hasn't it?
Well, it has, and every one of these candidates has to make their own decision. I think that what Mr. Santorum was hoping, and it's what Mr. Gingrich has been hoping, is that in this race, which has been very up and down with a lot of unpredictability, that perhaps there would be another great big opening in one of these races where they could bound in. There is still a lot of dissatisfaction with Mr. Romney and a lot of voters who are not particularly thrilled that he's the nominee. So they were hoping for another one of those moments in the sun, perhaps marshal enough support to swing the tides. But as the delegate math continued to add up, it just didn't look like it was possible.
How much credit does he get for making Mitt Romney a better candidate in your view, Kim?
I think he's done a lot, in particular on issues like tax policy and pro-growth policies, which Mr. Romney ended up adopting quite late in this race. And that was entirely because Mr. Santorum was showing real strength up in these races on Ohio and Michigan. Mr. Romney felt he had to proactively do something to earn more from these conservative voters who were attracted to Mr. Santorum. And so he pushed him in that regard. I think that what he's also done, he helped highlight some of Mr. Romney's weaknesses, which Mr. Romney would be well advised to consider as he goes into the general election. In particular, some of the problems he still has, for instance, with Obamacare and his own health plan that he passed in Massachusetts.
Okay, and on the flip side, does Rick Santorum deserve any blame for perhaps weakening the general election candidate that is likely to be Mitt Romney now, whether in terms of forcing Romney to spend a lot of money that he won't have to spend against President Obama, or perhaps all this infighting on the right tarnishing the Republican brand in any way for voters, particularly those swing voters and independent voters?
Look, primary fights are always ugly, and I don't think there's any party that when they get all said and done doesn't wish they hadn't been done a little bit differently. There were a lot of debates in which unhappy things were said. Mr. Romney, for his part, spent a lot of money and in many ways attacked a lot of his competitors and brought some of this on. He led the way in that to some degree. So yes, it went on a long time. This has concerned some people in the party establishment. But on the other hand, what this has done is it's given a lot of states a chance and a lot of voters to weigh in. It has, and again, primaries are about a test run for these candidates, giving them a chance to see what their weaknesses are, to see what their strengths are. Mr. Romney, again, if he's a smart candidate, he's going to take the experiences out of this primary and use them to help himself in a general election.
A big part of Rick Santorum's base were religious voters, particularly conservative evangelical Christians. Kim, do you think those voters are going to have any trouble moving into the Romney camp now that their guy is bowed out?
Look, I think that there may be a group of voters out there, a small minority of those cultural conservatives that you mentioned who do vote purely on religious and cultural issues, but it's not a very big number, and they may have problems voting for Mr. Romney, although they arguably would have done that even had those problems, even if there hadn't been this long primary, even if there hadn't been Mr. Santorum in the race. I think that what this race has shown, though, and if you go out on the trail, I've talked to a lot of voters, even those cultural conservatives, their number one priority remains the economy, and their number one ambition remains defeating Barack Obama. So I do think you'll probably see some real coalescing around Mr. Romney once he's the nominee. He's going to have to continue to work hard to keep those conservative, truly conservative voters in his base and coming out to vote for him this fall. Turnout will be important. But again, I think that there is a continuing and biting desire by many conservative voters to change this president.
Romney's aide made the famous Etch-a-Sketch comment a couple weeks ago, Kim, and in what he was trying to say is that in a general election you pivot. Do you expect to see any adjustment in tone or emphasis going forward? Are we now, by and large, in a general election campaign as far as Romney's concerned?
Well, one of the most fascinating things about Mr. Romney is that he ran from the beginning almost the way he would want to run in a general election. And this was one of his problems in the primary, is that many conservative voters didn't feel he had that fire and was hitting those notes more on a rightward sort of slant that would make them happy. I don't think you're going to see a big pivot from him. This is something that they were doing from the start. They didn't want to be in a situation where he had to do a big jump when he got into the general election. This is something, remember, the Romney campaign is very, very conscientious of all of these complaints in the past that he was a flip-flopper. They wanted to run this campaign that was as coherent and as they could make it. So I don't know if you're going to see a big switch. What you will see is him increasingly now focusing his fire on Barack Obama, and this is where we get to the meat of it.
Okay. And finally, does Newt Gingrich get a bump out of this at all, Kim? And do you expect him to be in there for the long haul?
Gingrich and Santorum have both been playing this waiting game, hoping that the other would get out. I think the problem for Mr. Gingrich is that this happens way too late. He was the person at this point, other than Ron Paul, with the least likelihood of obtaining enough delegates. And with Mr. Santorum now somewhat gracefully getting out of the race, I think what you're actually going to see is a lot more pressure on Mr. Gingrich, a lot more people asking him what his rationale is for staying in.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us, Kim.